Say it again. I told my husband into the microphone he'd forced into my hand. Say it in front of the cameras, Gavin. Tell them why the founder's chair at your charity gala belongs to your mistress tonight. If a room can choke, the Grand Meridian Ballroom did. Crystal light shattered across 200 donor faces. Gavin Cole smiled like a man who thought money was oxygen. Because you were never the heart of this company, Elena, he said. You were the ornament. Then he slid his hand around Sloane's bare waist, and every phone in the room tilted toward us. If you've ever watched a rich man destroy himself in public, stay with me, because what happened after that sentence turned a glittering charity night into the first crack in a billion-dollar empire. The first thing you need to understand is that I did not break that empire in one dramatic second under chandeliers and camera flashes. I only lit the match there. By the time Gavin Cole called me an ornament in front of Chicago's donors, reporters, board members, and politicians, I had already spent 14 months stacking dry timber around every lie he had built. I had just turned 36 that week. I was supposed to be standing at the center of the Cole Care Foundation Winter Promise Gala, smiling for society pages, thanking donors, raising money for the company's Compassion Access initiative, and pretending my marriage had a pulse. Instead, I stood beneath a ceiling painted with gold leaf clouds, while my husband arrived 42 minutes late with his chief brand officer on his arm and acted as if humiliating me in public were a clever seating arrangement. The Grand Meridian sat on the Chicago River, all white marble, mirrored corridors, and money so old it had learned how to whisper. The ballroom had been my design, the winter branches dipped in glass vases, the stage wrapped in silver silk, the donor wall lit from below. The menu selected to flatter Midwestern palates while making East Coast trustees feel they were still in a world worthy of vanity. I knew how to build an evening that looked like trust. Gavin knew how to monetize trust. For 7 years, he had sold the country a shining story. Cole Care wasn't just a senior living company, it was supposedly a mission, dignity, innovation, safety. Luxury blended with compassion. He built premium retirement campuses in Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, Arizona, and Florida, then sold partnership shares through feeder funds to school districts, municipal retirement boards, and regional banks hungry for stable returns. He called it doing well by doing good. I helped write his first investor deck. That was the part almost nobody knew. Gavin liked his wives decorative and his truths compartmentalized. Publicly, I was the elegant founder's spouse, the one who hosted board dinners and appeared in tasteful cream dresses beside ribbon cuttings. Privately, before marriage, I had earned my law degree at Northwestern, passed the Illinois bar, and spent 3 years in healthcare compliance. Gavin made sure that part of me disappeared after our wedding. He never forced it with one dramatic order. Men like him don't. They erode, they flatter, they reframe, they keep choosing for you until you look up and realize your life has been professionally gift-wrapped into silence. It makes donors comfortable, he used to say whenever I tried to re-enter the field. They don't want a spouse who looks like she's competing. They want warmth, trust, hospitality. You do that better than any lawyer ever could. For a while I believed I was choosing peace. Then the complaints began. Not publicly. Not in ways that would survive compliance review if someone intended them to survive. One daughter crying in a hallway at our Milwaukee campus because her father's morphine dose had been delayed again. One nurse at Oak Haven outside Indianapolis who resigned after 16-hour shifts and quietly asked me, at a fundraiser, "Do they tell you what happens when staffing ratios drop under night minimums?" One envelope left in my car after a Lake Geneva donor luncheon. No return address. Just photocopies. Maintenance override logs. Incident reports. Handwritten note. Check Cedar Hollow. Ask why cameras were off. I should have taken it straight to authorities then. That would have been clean. Moral. Sensible. But I knew Gavin. If I confronted him too early, he would scrub systems, bury people, shift funds, and manufacture a version of reality in which I had misunderstood everything. He had lawyers on retainer, a private cyber team, 2 senators who owed him callbacks, and an executive culture built on fear disguised as excellence. So I did what wives of men like Gavin learn to do when survival finally outruns politeness. I watched. I copied. I waited. I learned where he hid the real files. The second thing you need to understand is that Gavin never feared exposure. He feared contempt. He could withstand scrutiny if he thought he controlled the room. He could survive lawsuits by delaying them. He could call criticism, jealousy, incompetence, politics, misogyny, anti-business bias, anything. But he could not bear being laughed at. He could not bear witnesses seeing him lose command. The Winter Gala was therefore not an emotional choice. It was architecture. If he detonated, he would do it in front of the exact people whose belief kept him alive. I just needed to make sure the explosion happened after the right packets reached the right hands. At 7:15 that evening, donors were already seated. Former mayor, 2 hospital CEOs, a private equity partner from New York, the widow who funded our Alzheimer's wing in Kenosha, a state treasurer, 3 local anchors, one Pulitzer-winning columnist who had only agreed to attend because I personally called his wife and promised the event would be less of a circus than last year. The event coordinator kept glancing at the ballroom doors, waiting for Gavin. My mother sat at table 3 in a sapphire gown, trying and failing not to look worried. My younger brother Theo had flown in from Denver and stood at the back near the production table, pretending to scroll his phone while watching every door. Theo had hated Gavin by our second Thanksgiving. Theo hates very few people. He reserves the feeling for men who weaponize charm. At 7:22, my phone vibrated once in my clutch. Mara. Courier delivered to Vance. Chen confirmed receipt. Waiting on your signal for release packet B. Mara Singh had once been Colcare's regional compliance director for the Great Lakes Division. Gavin forced her out after she refused to sign a backdated staffing attestation. Officially, she pursued other opportunities. In reality, she spent 2 years consulting for firms that wanted help understanding how companies like Colcare disguise neglect as operational volatility. When I approached her 13 months earlier with one copied ledger and a question, she became the first person who looked at me not like a decorative spouse dabbling in paranoia, but like a professional standing at the edge of a very bad truth. Packet A had gone that afternoon to Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Vance and forensic investigator Lena Cho, through retired IRS Special Agent David Chen, who now did federal fraud consulting. Packet B construction kickback records, forged medication logs, hush settlements tied to resident deaths, would only move if Gavin performed exactly as I predicted. I did not know yet whether I wanted him to restrain himself or hand me the public proof of what he had become. At 7:27, the ballroom doors opened. People always describe power entering a room like a force of weather. Gavin didn't arrive like a storm. He arrived like a verdict. Tall, navy tuxedo, silver cufflinks, immaculate posture, the kind of face magazine covers called disciplined. He had aged beautifully because money had softened every consequence. And on his arm, in a column gown the color of poured champagne, was Sloane Mercer. Sloane was 30, maybe 31, with the kind of bone structure women on wellness panels paid entire industries to simulate. She handled Colcare's national brand strategy and had turned our care campuses into online aspiration content, soft music, slow-motion sunlight in memory care gardens, granddaughters hugging residents beside captions about dignity. She was smart, media fluent, and for the past 8 months, sleeping with my husband under the umbrella of late campaign nights. I knew because I found the draft hotel receipt first, then the duplicate keycard sleeve, then her earring behind the backseat vent in Gavin's car. It was almost insulting how lazy he became once he believed I had accepted my role. A wave moved through the ballroom. Heads turning, smiles freezing, phones brightening under tables. Gavin crossed the floor like he'd merely been delayed in traffic, then bent to kiss the air beside my cheek. Sorry, he said, loud enough for 3 nearby tables to hear. Big donor call. Sloane saved the clothes. Saved the clothes. As if that explained why the chief brand officer was arriving at my event on my husband's arm, wearing the diamond Riviere necklace Gavin gave me for our 6th anniversary. I looked at Sloane. She did not blush. That was her strongest feature after discipline. She smiled as if we were all adults above cliché. Elena, she said, soft and almost sympathetic. You look beautiful. I could have clawed her. Instead, I smiled back because there are moments when rage is a luxury and theater is work. You're wearing my necklace. A tiny pause, barely a crack. Gavin's jaw shifted once. For God's sake, Elena. Not tonight. Ah, there it was. The first note of irritation. No apology. No denial. Only the annoyance of a man forced to acknowledge that the furniture has begun speaking. At the head table, the seat map placed Gavin to my right. The chair on his right was reserved for Dr. Arthur Bell, board chair and retired cardiologist. Gavin pulled out Sloane's chair and sat her there instead, nudging the place card aside with 2 fingers. I heard 3 separate inhalations from nearby donors. Arthur Bell, who had not yet entered because his driver was late, would arrive to find himself displaced by the woman sleeping with our CEO. Theo caught my eye across the room. I gave the smallest possible shake of my head. Not yet. Dinner began. The MC made strained jokes. Gavin worked the room with polished ease, thanking donors, complimenting the chef, speaking about expanding access models and care equity infrastructure, while his hand moved again and again to the small of Sloane's back. Each touch felt calculated now. Not desire. Dominance. He wasn't just flaunting the affair. He was testing whether I would remain inside the role he had designed. That role had survived worse. It survived the first time he called me useless after I suggested his Florida expansion risked understaffing memory care wings. It survived the fertility specialist who said his motility numbers were poor, and Gavin spent the drive home in silence, then informed me we would never discuss the results with family because I refused to become a pity narrative. It survived the night he locked me out on our own penthouse terrace in November because I'd asked why 2 residents from Cedar Hollow had identical fall reports with identical timestamps in different units. It survived the bruising grip on my wrist in Aspen when I told him I wanted to go back to law part-time. It survived every dinner where he praised my poise as if he had cultivated it in a greenhouse. But something about seeing Sloan in my chair at the donor gala scraped through the numbness. Maybe because I had spent 14 months gathering proof that residents had been sedated to cover staffing gaps, while Gavin drained partnership funds through shell vendors tied to his cousin's construction firm and a captive insurance subsidiary in Delaware. Maybe because I knew that tonight, even if I remained calm, he was already standing on rotten floorboards. The soup course arrived. Arthur Bell finally entered, assessed the seating disaster in one clinical sweep, and accepted a reset chair 3 spots down, with the expression of a man making a note for later use. By the time the salmon came, Gavin had taken 2 bourbons neat, and the room had adjusted to public discomfort, with the desperate enthusiasm of wealthy people pretending nothing indecorous can happen if they continue buttering bread. Then Lila Harrison from Channel 8 asked from Table 1, too brightly, "Elena, how did you and Gavin first meet?" That founding story always tests beautifully with viewers. She meant it lightly. She got a funeral. Gavin answered before I could. At a compliance conference. Believe it or not, Elena was the only woman in the room who looked like she wanted to sue the keynote speaker. A little laughter. I smiled. "You told me later that you fell in love because I didn't flatter you." "Still true," he said, cutting his salmon. "Though now I appreciate a little more deference in a home environment." More laughter. Uneasy this time. "And Sloan?" Lila asked, chasing sparkle because local anchors can smell blood from 20 feet away. "How long has she been with Coal Care?" Sloan set down her wine. "Almost 4 years. "Feels longer," Gavin said. That did it, not because it revealed the affair. Everyone with functioning eyes had already concluded that. It was the tone. The proprietary little flick. The invitation to laugh with him at my expense, at a gala I built to protect his company. I placed my napkin beside my plate and turned toward him. "Say what you mean," I said. The room quieted. Gavin looked at me with the lazy irritation of a man being inconvenienced by a dog barking during a board call. "Elena, no, really. Don't hide behind wit. If you're going to seat your mistress in the founder's chair at my table, at least use adult language." Sloan went very still. Arthur Bell looked down into his water glass with renewed interest. A fork clinked 3 tables back. Somewhere a phone camera rose slightly higher. "Jesus," Gavin muttered, then smiled out toward the donors. "My wife has a taste for melodrama." I said nothing. That is one of the oldest tricks in the world. When a woman demands clarity, call her theatrical. When she names a fact, label the naming an overreaction. When she doesn't retreat, escalate contempt until the room helps discipline her. Gavin straightened in his chair and did exactly what I had feared and expected. "You want honesty?" he said, voice carrying now. "Fine. Sloane's here because she works. She closes investors. She builds campaigns. She actually contributes. This event exists because people like her keep this company moving while people like you obsess over centerpieces." Every head at the head table turned toward him. Not one toward me. They were all waiting to see if I would cry. "I built this foundation calendar for 6 years," I said. "Hosted," he corrected. "You hosted. Let's not confuse labor with ambiance." A few people shifted. No one intervened. He was enjoying himself now. That was the danger. Once Gavin sensed submission around him, cruelty became sport. "Do you know what the difference is between you and Sloan?" he asked. "When I hand Sloan a problem, she solves it. When I hand you a problem, you turn it into a feeling." There was a gasp somewhere to my left. My mother had gone white. I should tell you I did feel something then. Not despair. Not even humiliation. Not in the way spectators likely imagined. What I felt was a hard, strange calm. The kind that comes when a bridge you've been testing under hidden load finally announces exactly where it will fail. I looked at him and saw all 14 months align. The copies in the storage unit under Mara's cousin's name. The encrypted drive in Theo's climbing gear bag. The interview I recorded with a former nurse from Cedar Hollow who watched a resident aspirate after sedation because only 2 staffers covered an entire night wing. The construction invoices routed through Blackridge Development, owned on paper by Gavin's cousin but funded by patient reserve cash pools. The tuition payments for his younger brother's med school drawn from community wellness grants. The voice memo from Gavin telling a facilities director to bury the dead floor issue until after bond renewal. The fake philanthropy. The real deaths. I reached into my evening clutch and felt the slim black flash drive taped inside the lining. I didn't need it. Not anymore. Tonight had become evidence of a different kind. You're right, I said. Gavin blinked. You are absolutely right about one thing. I have been turning a problem into a feeling. I stood, smoothing my silver gown. Specifically, the feeling federal investigators are going to have when they finish reading what I gave them this afternoon. There was no sound in the ballroom. Not even silverware. Gavin did not react at first because truly dangerous information always takes one beat longer to reach men who think themselves untouchable. Then I watched color drain from under the surface of his face. What did you just say? He asked. Packet A, I said. Assistant U.S. Attorney Vance. Forensic review, staffing manipulation, shell vendors, resident reserve siphoning, bribed inspectors, Blackridge construction kickbacks, and the sedation logs from Cedar Hollow. I looked at Sloan. You may want separate counsel. Sloan's lips parted. Gavin! Shut up, he snapped without looking at her. Phones were openly up now. Donors, media, staff. Theo, across the room, was already moving toward Mara's side entrance signal. Gavin stood so fast his chair struck the stage riser behind him. You insane. Vindictive little. No, I cut in, clear and sharp. Not vindictive. Late. His eyes changed then. The public face dropped. What looked out at me had no polish left in it. You don't know what you're talking about. I know about Cedar Hollow. I know about Meadow Ridge. I know why the south elevator at Brookline Terrace had camera outages during nightfalls. I know about the dead floor financing in Naperville, the ghost vendors in Delaware, the cash transfer to your brother's tuition account, the hush packages routed through resident memorial funds, and the fact that your flagship Compassion Accesses program never funded a single low-income resident bed outside promotional pilots. I turned slightly so the room could hear every word. I know enough that if you touch one file tonight, it becomes obstruction. There it was. The thing Gavin feared more than exposure. Witnesses. 200 of them. He moved around the table in 3 fast steps. I thought for one foolish second he might lower his voice and plead. That would have been human. Gavin hated being human in public. Instead, he slapped me. Hard. The crack leapt off the chandeliers and came back from every mirrored wall in the room. For a suspended second, the entire ballroom froze in one collective, unbelieving inhale. Then chaos fractured. My head turned from the force. I tasted copper. Someone shouted my name. A glass shattered. Sloan stumbled backward, knocking into the donor wall. Cameras swung. Phones rose higher. Theo lunged across from the production area, but security blocked him on reflex before recognizing what had happened. Gavin stood over me, breathing fast, one hand still half lifted, the exact picture of a rich man who had finally outrun his own image. And because God occasionally favors structure, every major local camera had already been trained on our table for the donor toast. If the night had ended there, it would still have destroyed him. But Gavin's fatal flaw was always momentum. Once he started falling, he could not stop himself from digging. She's unstable, he barked at the room. You hear me? Elena has been unstable for months. She steals private files and twists them because she can't handle. My God, Arthur Bell said quietly, not to anyone in particular. You hit her. Not loud, not dramatic, but the sentence landed like a judicial note. Theo reached me first, hands on my shoulders, face white with fury. Elena. I'm okay, I said, though my cheek was already pulsing. Mara appeared at my other side, phone in hand. Packet B? She asked low. I looked at Gavin, at the sweat gathering now at his temples, at Sloan backing away in horror because whatever she had signed up for, she had not signed up for assault in a ballroom full of witnesses and reporters. Release it, I said. Mara tapped send. Gavin heard the tone and knew. What did you do? Everything, I said. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Vance entered 21 minutes later through the side corridor reserved for hotel executive service. He was not dramatic either. Mid-40s, charcoal suit, tired eyes, the stillness of someone who had long ago learned that panic is contagious and therefore expensive. With him came Lena Cho, 2 federal agents, and David Chen in civilian clothes. They didn't storm the ballroom. They simply arrived while rumors were still ricocheting between tables, and asked to speak with Gavin privately. There is no such thing as private in a room where 200 people have just watched you hit your wife. Gavin tried to recover. Of course he did. He laughed once too loudly and announced there had been a domestic misunderstanding. Vance asked for access to Colcare's server mirrors and regional staffing databases under preservation authority pending warrant execution. Lena Cho requested to know why medication discrepancy reports from Cedar Hollow no longer matched state filings. David Chen asked about Blackridge. At the mention of Blackridge, Gavin's brother Nolan, who had just arrived late from O'Hare and was standing by the back bar, turned and walked straight out of the ballroom. That was the moment half the room understood this wasn't marital drama. It was an unraveling. Someone from Channel 8 went live. I did not stay to watch the rest. Theo got me into the service elevator. Mara came with us. Down one floor, through catering, out into a river entrance where cold Chicago air hit my face like a correction. My cheek throbbed. Theo wanted the hospital. Mara wanted the safe apartment in West Loop. I wanted 5 uninterrupted minutes to remember I still had a body separate from the war I had just started. The town car waiting at the curb was not Gavin's. It belonged to me, or rather, to the quiet legal contingency fund I had built by selling inherited land in eastern Iowa before marriage, then never fully disclosing the proceeds, because I already knew Gavin preferred dependence in others, the way some men prefer expensive watches. My grandmother used to say every woman should own one door no man gave her. Mine was a trust, a car, and enough cash to disappear twice if required. We took Lower Wacker West, city lights slashing the windows. Mara handed me a compact mirror. My left cheek was reddening, the shape of his hand already shadowing beneath the skin. You got it all? I asked. Every release went out, she said. Vance has the staffing matrix, the incident duplications, hospice diversion records, vendor shells, resident memorial transfers, and the Naperville dead floor footage. Chen is pulling archived payroll. Bell texted he'll resign publicly by morning. Theo muttered something vicious under his breath. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Sloan? Mara glanced at her phone. She left the ballroom alone. Gavin's PR chief has gone dark, which usually means she's lawyering up or calling him first. Maybe both. Good. Fear redistributed quickly in collapsing systems. The safe apartment belonged to an LLC registered in Wisconsin through 3 boring names and 1 elderly registered agent who believed she was protecting intellectual property. 15th floor. 1 bedroom. No art. Functional furniture. Clean windows overlooking the expressway. Theo locked every latch and checked the secondary stairwell before letting himself breathe. Then my phone, which I had left on only for controlled numbers, vibrated. Mom. I answered before it could ring again. I'm okay. Her breath broke on the line. He hit you. Yes. I should have seen it sooner. That almost undid me more than the slap. Not because she had failed me, but because daughters of careful mothers learn young how much silence can look like peace from the outside. You saw enough, I said. That's why Theo never liked him. In the background, I heard my father asking whether they should call the police, a lawyer, the governor, or all 3. Go home, I told them. Don't speak to press. Don't answer any unknown numbers. Theo's with me. Theo took the phone from my hand and went to the window, speaking in his flat mountain guide voice, the one he uses when other people panic on a cliff. He is younger than I am by 4 years and has never once in his life failed me when things turn physical. Mara opened her laptop at the kitchen island and began building the next 24 hours. That is another thing people misunderstand about betrayal. They imagine revelation creates release. It doesn't. Revelation creates logistics. At 11:14 p.m., Channel 8 aired the slap. At 11:27, 2 national outlets picked up the clip. At 11:41, coal care stock fell 18% in overnight trading futures. At 11:58, a former nurse from Milwaukee emailed Mara willing to speak on record. At 12:06, a board member resigned. At 12:20, Nolan's med school tuition transfers began circulating in redacted screenshots among 3 healthcare reporters and 1 state auditor. At 12:43, Gavin texted me from a number I didn't recognize. You think you've started something clever. You have no idea who you just made enemies with. I did not answer. At 1:02 a.m., another text came from Sloan. I didn't know about the deaths. Please believe that. He said you were paranoid. He said you copied things because you were unstable. I have files from brand reimbursements and donor routing. If I talk, can you keep me from being buried with him? There it was. The oldest migration in a sinking ship. I handed the phone to Mara. Bring her in. Theo frowned. You trust her? No. But she's frightened. Which is almost as useful. By 2:30, Sloan sat in the safe apartment wearing jeans. No makeup, no diamonds, no poise left. She looked younger without performance, which somehow made me angrier. Theo took one look at her and went to the bedroom before he said something unrecoverable. Sloan wrapped both hands around untouched tea. He told me you were emotionally erratic, she said. That you'd been stealing files for months because you wanted leverage in a divorce. He also told you sleeping with married founders was strategic for your career? She flinched. I know how this looks. It looks exactly the way it is. Her eyes flashed for the first time. Shame always brings a little vanity with it. You don't have to enjoy this. No, I said. I don't. Silence sat between us. Then she reached into her oversized tote and took out a slim encrypted SSD drive. I pulled this from Gavin's media backup vault 3 weeks ago. I thought it was donor blackmail material. I kept it because... She swallowed. because I knew he'd turn on me one day. I just didn't know when. Mara connected the drive to an air-gapped laptop. Folders populated, brand reimbursements, campaign pilots, donor influence maps, state regulator gifts, media response trees, hidden retainer agreements. One labeled Legacy. Inside Legacy were subfolders for campuses, resident incidents, and political relations. Gavin was not merely stealing. He was running a narrative machine around the theft. Sloan pointed with shaking fingers. He had a team classify resident deaths by reputational risk. If a family looked loud, he elevated settlement speed. If a family looked poor, he delayed. If a family looked educated, he routed them to in-house grief consultants before legal contact. The consultants weren't therapists, they were closers. Mara said nothing. She just kept opening files. Another folder. State influence. Entries for inspectors, scheduling, golf outings, campaign bundling, Christmas gifting. Then we found the video. Not a murder. Not yet. But enough. It showed Gavin in his office 3 months earlier with Nolan and CFO Rebecca Tisch. The camera angle suggested an internal security feed copied before deletion. They were discussing south wing compression at Brookline Terrace, and whether 2 resident deaths from overnight oxygen delays could be grouped as end-stage inevitabilities to avoid triggering federal review. Gavin's voice was clear. If families get emotional, settle them, he said. If they get litigious, run the hospice chart timing and make it look like decline. Nobody investigates quiet death. Theo came out of the bedroom halfway through and stood behind us like a thunderhead. Sloan whispered, I didn't know about that one until I found the vault. I believed she hadn't known the scope. I did not forgive her for any of the rest. At 3:45, Mara sent a secure excerpt to Vance and flagged the full vault for morning handoff. David Chen replied 6 minutes later. This is enough to widen beyond health fraud. Preserve everything. Expect retaliation. Retaliation arrived by sunrise. At 7:12, a soft knock came at the apartment door. No building buzzer, no call first. Theo's hand went up immediately. Silence. Second knock. Mara checked the peephole and swore softly. Who? I asked. Dr. Felix Rowan. I knew the name before I knew the face. Felix Rowan was Gavin's personal physician, concierge style, discreet, loyal, expensive. He had attended 2 donor weekends in Colorado and once prescribed me sleeping medication after a gala when Gavin said I'd been overwrought. I never took it. Something about Felix's careful eyes made me file him under men who understood too much and billed by the hour for burying it. We let him in because sometimes danger arrives with documents. Felix was in his 50s, handsome in the washed-out way of men who live on private air travel and hand-stitched shoes. He carried a leather folder and smelled faintly of rain and cedar. He looked at my cheek, then away. I have 10 minutes before I become very stupid to have done this, he said. Theo stayed by the door. Then start. Felix opened the folder and slid 3 pages onto the kitchen island. They're filing for emergency conservatorship, he said. By noon. The room went cold. I stared down at the draft petition. My husband, supported by his physician and his family office counsel, intended to argue I was unstable, paranoid, suffering from mood dysregulation with dissociative fixation, and unable to manage my affairs safely in light of obsessive document theft, grandiose delusion, and public self-endangerment. Attached was a clinical summary under Felix Rowan's name. I looked up very slowly. You signed this? I wrote none of it. They sent me a template at 4 a.m. and asked me to finalize. I came here instead. Why? He exhaled once. Because 6 months ago my mother died at Meadow Ridge. No one spoke. I moved her there after her second stroke because Gavin sold me the best neurological support unit in the region. She aspirated during a shift with 2 aides covering 30 residents. I asked questions. Suddenly I was getting free executive medical retainers, golf invites, and reminders that litigation would disturb my father. Felix's voice stayed flat, which made it worse. I accepted the retainers. I told myself I needed proof. Or maybe I told myself that because I was ashamed. He pushed another envelope toward me. I have medication discrepancy audits Gavin asked me to sanitize. Handwritten directives from Rebecca Tisch. And the original request to falsify your conservatorship summary. Use them. Mara took the envelope as if it might combust. Theo asked the only question that mattered. Why should we trust you now? Felix met his eyes. You shouldn't. But trust is not the currency on offer. Utility is. That made Theo like him slightly more. Once Felix left through the back service elevator, Mara called Vance. Within 15 minutes, the federal scope widened again. By 9, 2 state agencies wanted to speak with me. By 9:30, Gavin's legal team leaked to one outlet that Mrs. Cole's recent behavior has raised long-standing health concerns among those closest to her. At 9:32, Mara released Rowan's unsigned draft and the false conservatorship packet to 3 reporters. By 9:45, the narrative pivoted back hard. This is the real game in white-collar collapse. Not truth versus lies. Competing timelines. Which story lands first? Which documents authenticate faster? Which face still looks composed when the cameras arrive? At 11, Vance called directly. We're executing warrants on Chicago headquarters and 3 campuses by noon, he said. We'll need you prepared for a formal statement this afternoon. Also, your husband's CFO is missing. That hit me more sharply than expected. Rebecca Tisch was not sentimental. Missing meant calculating, fleeing, bargaining, or dead. Has Gavin run? I asked. No, he gave a statement through counsel and is staying visible. Men like him think optics are oxygen. That was true. Then Vance added. There's one more issue. We found large transfers from Colcare Memorial Reserve accounts into a private development entity called Harbor Slate. Your husband owns none of it on paper. The beneficial chain leads to your name. I laughed once, without humor. Of course it does. He did not laugh. Can you explain it? Yes. Gavin used my dormant premarital LLC 2 years ago for a donor event art lease, because it was a clean shell with no debt. I forgot it existed after. If Harbor Slate sits under that structure, he nested fraud inside my paperwork. Can you prove you weren't involved? Yes, I said. But I'll need the storage unit. The storage unit sat in Elk Grove Village, between a tile wholesaler and a theatrical supply warehouse. Unit 442. Climate-controlled. Paid in cash through Mara's cousin and accessed only 3 times in 14 months. Always under hats and boring jackets. It held duplicates, ledgers, backups. A copy of my marriage certificate, my bar card, my old case notes. The pieces of Elena Mercer that Gavin had spent 7 years encouraging me to set aside while he quietly used the legal architecture of my former life. Theo drove. Mara rode in the back with 2 burner phones and 1 laptop on her knees. Sloane stayed at the apartment with instructions not to touch anything or imagine redemption as intimacy. At the unit, I unlocked the door and smelled paper, dust, and cold metal. There are few sensations more clarifying than opening a hidden room built to outlast your own disbelief. We found the Harbor Slate file in Box 6, under campus debt and above political. The chain was exactly what I feared. Gavin had resurrected my dormant LLC, Mercer Advisory Holdings, through forged digital consent and used it as an upstream member in Harbor Slate development. Harbor Slate then invoiced Colcare Memorial Reserves for transition design consulting, tied to 2 campus renovations that never occurred. He had hidden theft under my old name and counted on one of 2 outcomes. Either I never discovered it, in which case I was the perfect paper shield, or I did discover it only after he framed me unstable, in which case the beneficial ownership trail made me look like the architect. Jesus, Theo whispered. Mara flipped through the stack. Not just theft. This is preloaded scapegoating. I found the signature page. My electronic authorization time-stamped at 2:14 a.m., on a night I had been in Santa Fe with my mother for her knee surgery. Gavin had used our old shared token device, the one I thought we deactivated years earlier. I almost admired the patience of it. Take everything, I said. We rolled 3 boxes, the external drives, and a garment bag of old files into the SUV. On the way back, Theo's phone rang from an unknown Arizona number. He put it on speaker. Mr. Mercer? A woman asked. This is Officer Pena with Sedona Police. We're at your parents' home regarding a wellness complaint. A caller reported that your sister made violent threats toward herself and your parents. Gavin. Not because he thought the call would hold, because he wanted me to know he could still reach toward anything soft. Theo's voice went lethal. The complaint is false. My parents are safe. Stay there until I verify with them. By the time he ended the call, my hands were shaking. I am telling you this because audiences love strength, and strength is often edited into a cleaner thing than it is. The truth is that I did not become fearless once I fought back. I became busy while scared. I became disciplined while furious. Gavin's threat to my parents reached past my anger and touched the last instinct he had not managed to domesticate in me. By 1 p.m., I was in a federal conference room giving my first formal statement under counsel, not at a courthouse, not yet. In a cold rectangular room on the 23rd floor of a secure building near the Loop, with a camera in one corner, a legal pad in front of me, and Daniel Vance across the table asking careful questions that would shape the next 10 years of multiple lives. Who first alerted you to staffing discrepancies? When did you copy the incident logs? How did you access the backup server? Did you ever personally alter, delete, or fabricate records? Did you benefit from Harbor Slate transfers? Did your husband ever discuss state regulators, inspectors, or reserve pools in your presence? What did he say after you confronted him about Cedar Hollow? Had he ever struck you before last night? That last one sat between us. I thought of Aspen, of the terrace, of the bruises under sleeves, of the night in Miami when he shattered a lamp so close to my face that one cut landed above my eyebrow, and he told everyone the next day I had walked into a glass door after too much champagne. Of the efficient apologies that always followed flowers, planes, donations, tenderness so polished it felt outsourced. Yes, I said. Vance didn't react visibly. He just wrote. My lawyer for the statement, Clara Esposito, whom Mara had lined up at dawn, leaned in. We'll supplement with dates once we review photos and prior records. After 3 hours, Vance closed his folder and said, Mrs. Cole, your cooperation is significant. It also makes you a target. I already am. No, he said quietly. You are now a federal target vector. It sounded clinical. It was the kindest warning he could give without dramatizing reality. At 5 that evening, the warrants went public. Agents carrying boxes out of Colcare headquarters. Computers seized from 3 campuses. Board texts leaked. Stock halted. Families gathering outside Cedar Hollow and Brookline Terrace, with handmade signs and old photographs. One sign on the evening news read, My mother was not a liability event. I sat on the apartment sofa with ice on my cheek and understood for the first time that the story had already moved beyond me. That should have brought relief. It brought weight. Because when a private cruelty opens into a public crime, you learn your suffering was never singular enough to be the whole point. At 8:20, Rebecca Tish resurfaced. Not through the feds, through me. She sent a text to the emergency number on an old holiday card, the one I had once insisted staff use only for true crises involving residents or family. I have 6 hours before Gavin finds out I still have this phone. If you want to know where the Phoenix bodies are buried, meet me alone at Street Agnes parking garage, level 4, 10:30 p.m. No police, no brother, no lawyer. Mara read it twice. Theo didn't need to. No. Agreed, Clara said over speaker from her office. No unsupervised meetings with a missing CFO who may be bargaining, wired, or desperate. But Rebecca's mention of Phoenix mattered. Colcare had a new Arizona expansion outside Scottsdale Cypress Mesa, funded partly through municipal pension debt and marketed as a luxury neurological aging campus. If there were bodies, literal or paper, and Rebecca believed she had 6 hours, something bigger was moving. We don't go alone, Mara said, but we go. 10:30 found me in an unmarked sedan, 2 levels below Rebecca's chosen spot, while federal surveillance teams watched every ramp and camera feed within lawful distance. Not because I had ignored instructions. Because Vance, after 90 minutes of argument, agreed Rebecca might be our only path to the Arizona side before Gavin burned it. Rebecca Tish arrived in a gray suit with no coat despite the cold. Thin, severe. The sort of woman people describe as icy when they really mean disciplined beyond charm. She carried no bag. Good sign and bad sign. I met her beside a concrete pillar on level 4, while David Chen watched through a maintenance van camera feed, and Theo nearly climbed out of his skin below us. Rebecca did not greet me. She looked at my cheek, then at the security camera overhead, and chose a blind angle with muscle memory that told me she had used parking garages for difficult conversations before. You always were prettier than he deserved, she said. It was such a strange opening that I nearly laughed. You have 2 minutes, I said. 3, she replied. You'll need them. Then she started talking fast. Cypress Mesa had not merely been underbuilt. It was never financially intended to stabilize. Gavin and Rebecca structured it as a burn vehicle, pull in Arizona teacher pensions and county retirement money through rosy occupancy projections. Use pre-opening construction overruns to drain capital into Black Ridge and 2 Nevada vendors. Delay actual resident admissions in the neurological wing, while still recognizing revenue through contractual care reservations. Shift understaffing costs to a captive reinsurer. When collapse became unavoidable, blame state reimbursement pressure, and sell remaining real estate value out from under care obligations. How many residents? I asked. 48 admitted in Phase 1, 23 high acuity, 3 deaths during oxygen backup failure in July, internal report buried. Families settled through church mediators' Gavin funds. I felt concrete under my shoes and fury under everything else. Why come now? Because he's moving the final ledger tonight. Rebecca's voice stayed flat, but her eyes betrayed it. Fear, finally visible. He thinks headquarters is compromised. Nolan was supposed to transport a drive from a Lake Forest house safe to a private jet charter at DuPage before dawn. If he makes that flight, the offshore sequence disappears. Where? Singapore, then Malta, then maybe nowhere anyone sees again. There it was. The word that keeps surfacing whenever men with perfect hair build empires on invisible drains. Offshore. Always somewhere sunny, distant, contemptuous of ordinary grief. Rebecca looked over the rail down into the dark. He also means to pin Harbor Slate on you fully. He has a prepared statement, signed by his mother, claiming you revived Mercer Advisory during a mental health break and pressured finance to root philanthropic reserves into your own speculative developments. His mother signs that, and she implicates herself in document fraud. She knows. She thinks she can outlive paper. That sounded like Elaine Cole, Gavin's mother. Elaine did not merely raise the family. She curated it. Widow at 52, former school superintendent. Pillar of civic boards. The kind of elegant predator who learned early that Midwestern society forgives women who weaponize propriety as long as they do it while funding literacy drives. She had hated me from the first day she realized I was not impressed by lineage. Rebecca took one step closer. If I give you the Lake Forest address, the jet tail number, the lot code, and the Arizona burial packet, what do I get? There it is, I said. What do you want? Protection. Not witness protection. Not yet. I want my son moved from Northwestern dorm housing tonight. I want a guarantee he won't get touched before I can cooperate, and I want federal acknowledgement that I came in before formal arrest. You helped do this. I know exactly what I helped do. For the first time, something cracked in her composure. My husband died bankrupt from pancreatic cancer, while Gavin smiled at me across a board table and said if I kept margins tight, he would make sure my son never worried about debt. Men like him don't recruit greed first. They recruit desperation, then promotion, then shame. By the time greed arrives, it's wearing your own face. I held her gaze. Tell Vance everything, I said. If he believes your cooperation is first and full, he'll document it. Your son gets moved tonight. Rebecca nodded once, then listened carefully. 20 minutes later, federal teams were on the way to Lake Forest, DuPage, and 2 Arizona sites. Rebecca rode out in a separate car under temporary protective hold. Theo wanted to hug me and throttle me in one motion. Mara wanted coffee and 6 more laptops. David Chen said only, "You have a gift for turning rotten people into useful timing." I said, "I married Gavin Cole. Timing was the only way to survive." At 2:12 a.m., Vance called. We got the drive. I sat up on the apartment floor where exhaustion had finally folded me. Nolan? Detained attempting to depart DuPage. He had the ledger, a second passport, and 180,000 inches bearer bonds. Also, your mother-in-law's jeweler apparently does brisk business with vault concealment. I closed my eyes. And Arizona? A pause. Worse than Rebecca said. There are sentences that change the texture of your blood. What does worse mean? It means Cypress Mesa was using a dummy generator backup certified by an inspector who took gifts from Blackridge. It means one oxygen failure death may have been survivable with compliant staffing. It means church mediation money came through Elaine Cole's Civic Foundation. He didn't need to say more. Elaine had been laundering both image and harm through philanthropy. Of course she had. Sleep if you can, Vance said. I laughed once at that. He didn't. By morning, Elaine called me herself. No blocked number, no lawyer first. Straight from the family office line as if she were summoning a caterer to discuss floral substitutions. Elena. I put the call on speaker so Mara and Theo could hear. Elaine, this has gone far enough. Interesting. I'd say that line was back at assaulting your daughter-in-law in front of cameras. A soft inhale. Gavin lost his temper because you've spent months destabilizing a company that houses vulnerable people. Whatever mistakes were made, you are now worsening them. The brilliance of that sentence. Families like hers always turn wreckage into your responsibility if you name it too early. You mean whatever crimes were hidden? You always did have a flair for ugly words. Her tone cooled. I'm calling with something like mercy. Stop cooperating. Publicly request privacy. Attribute your accusations to marital strain. In return, I will see to it that no one challenges your settlement. I almost admired the narrowness of her imagination. She truly believed this remained about money. You think I care about a settlement? I think you care about surviving what comes next. Gavin is not the only person exposed by your theatrics. There it was, not an empty threat, a widening map. Who else? I asked. Silence. Then, you married into a machine you never understood. I understand it better than your son does now. Her laugh had no warmth in it. No, Elena. You understand documents. You still don't understand hunger. She ended the call. Theo stared at the darkened screen. That sounded bad. It sounded true, Mara said. And she was right. Machines like Coal Care do not grow on one narcissist alone. They require bankers, inspectors, priests, consultants, board members, cousins, and women in pearls who chair fundraisers while settlements pass through memorial accounts. Elaine had just confirmed what Vance likely already suspected. This was no longer one man's collapse. It was a network. The press conference happened on day 4. Not because I wanted one, because silence was being filled for me. Gavin's team had by then leaked old photos of me at a stress clinic, cropped records from a sleep specialist, and a wildly creative narrative suggesting I had reactivated dormant legal ambitions through financial misconduct when Gavin refused to fund my vanity ventures. One opinion columnist even wrote that highly educated women often suffer identity rupture when choosing domestic life. I read that line and nearly put my fist through glass. Vance proposed a narrow public statement to stabilize witness credibility and reassure resident families the government was moving. Clara hated the idea. Mara said we had passed the point where not speaking would be interpreted as guilt. Theo said if I had to stand in front of cameras again, he wanted a tactical vest and permission to tackle anyone with a microphone over 8 inches. So at 11 a.m., in the Federal Building press room, I stood behind a podium beneath unforgiving lights with Daniel Vance to my left and rows of cameras in front of me. I wore navy, no jewelry, hair pulled back, cheek bruise concealed only enough not to become the whole story. And for the first time in 7 years, I spoke in public without designing my tone to protect Gavin. I am cooperating with investigators, I said. I have done so because vulnerable residents, their families, and public investors deserve truth more than my marriage deserved silence. Questions exploded immediately. Did I profit from Harbor Slate? No. Was I aware of the Arizona deaths earlier? Not until recently. Had Gavin abused me before? I will answer what is relevant to the criminal inquiry and civil risk. Why wait? Because exposing a system built to bury evidence requires evidence strong enough to survive the system. Did I still love my husband? That one came from a woman in the second row whose face I'd seen on morning television for years. I looked straight at her and said, I think the more urgent question is whether he ever loved anyone he couldn't use. That line led every broadcast by afternoon. So did the next development. At 1:47 p.m., while networks replayed my statement, Sloane, who had been under quiet proffer protection in the apartment, remembered something important. Not suddenly. Shame rarely works like lightning. More like thaw. She was standing in the kitchen with Mara reviewing donor gift logs when she saw Elaine's Civic Foundation listed beside a heritage preservation grant to St. Luke's Transitional Chapel, a small ecumenical center outside Phoenix. Sloane went pale. What? Mara asked. Sloane put a hand to her mouth. The chapel. What about it? Gavin made me shoot there last spring. Not for a brand campaign. For a private archive. He said we were filming legacy testimony for benefactors. Only there weren't any benefactors. It was just Elaine, Gavin, Rebecca, and some pastor. I thought maybe tax optics. She looked at me. They recorded something in the basement and made me sign a destruction memo after. By 6 p.m., federal agents had a warrant for St. Luke's. By midnight, we knew why Elaine had sounded so calm. The chapel basement held no bodies. Worse, it held paper, boxes, drives, trust deeds, private pledge agreements, settlement schedules, donor laundering maps, signed inspector thank you letters routed as chaplaincy support, and one hardbound ledger in Elaine's hand tracking which grieving families were manageable, educated but poor, devout, or potentially theatrical. Potentially theatrical. I read that phrase and felt something inside me go cold in a way anger never quite reaches. Elaine had not merely tolerated harm. She had cataloged vulnerability as a management problem. The ledger also included one name that did not belong to any family, inspector, or donor. Mayor Patrick Reeve. Chicago's current mayor. Not huge payments. Strategic ones. Event support. Campaign bundling. Deferred zoning reciprocity. It was enough that by dawn, national media stopped describing coal care as a healthcare scandal and began describing it as a political corruption case with elder care casualties. That was when things became dangerous in a newer, quieter way. Phones started ringing and going dead. Cars seemed to idle longer near the apartment entrance. A bike messenger left flowers with no card. Theo spotted the same silver SUV twice in 3 hours. Vance upgraded our security posture and moved us to a federal safe house in Evanston. On the drive north, I watched the city move past in gray November strips and thought about what Elaine said, documents versus hunger. She was right in one sense. I did understand documents better than appetite. Gavin and Elaine had built power by understanding what people would swallow if you packaged it as inevitability. Residents die, sons inherit, boards trust, regulators tire, wives adapt, voters forget. By the time public outrage forms, the money has moved twice, and the faces responsible are standing at podiums asking for grace. What they did not understand was that I had finally become patient enough to starve them of sequence. In Evanston, the safe house was a renovated lakeside duplex with too many locks and not enough curtains. Clara joined us in person. So did a digital forensics team. By then, my life felt less like a life than a command center wearing my clothes. And then, impossibly, Gavin asked to see me. Not through reporters. Not through his attorney, through Daniel Vance. He wants a monitored conversation before formal indictment, Vance said. Ordinarily, I'd refuse. But his counsel suggests he may be willing to discuss a plea pathway if it includes protecting certain family members. Elaine. Of course. Why me? I asked. Because he still thinks he can move you. The right answer was no. Clara said no before I even inhaled. Mara said no with her eyebrows and a very impressive profanity. Theo offered to move Gavin's teeth manually, if transport logistics allowed. But I knew Gavin, and Vance knew that I knew. If I do this, I said, it's recorded, monitored, and over the moment he lies. Vance gave the smallest hint of a smile. Then it may be very short. The conversation took place in a conference room at the federal building with glass walls and 2 agents outside. Gavin entered in a dark overcoat and no tie, looking thinner already, as if exposure had sharpened him at all the edges where vanity usually sits. He glanced first at my face, then at my hands, searching for jewelry, weakness, a wedding ring. He found none. You look tired, he said. I feel accurate. A flicker. Old Elena would never have said that. We sat across from each other at a polished table, microphones visible. Good. I wanted every false tenderness preserved. He folded his hands. My attorneys think there's still a way to contain this. I almost laughed. Contain what exactly? The residents? The dead? The bribery? The assault? Or the fact that your mother indexed grieving families by manageability? His jaw flexed. Elaine kept notes. That doesn't make her criminal. No, I said. The money does. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. You always did mistake proximity for comprehension. And you always mistook underestimation for control. For 1 second, something like respect moved across his face. Not warm respect. Predator recognition. I came because despite everything, I'd prefer not to watch you destroy yourself with me. You should have thought of that before trying to declare me incompetent. That was damage control. For assault? For fraud? For 3 preventable deaths in Arizona? His eyes narrowed. Rebecca talked. She is. Fully. He looked away then, toward the glass wall where his own reflection hovered over faint city movement. She won't survive a cross without us. There it was. Not concern. Assessment. What do you want, Gavin? He turned back. I can give you a cleaner ending than the one you're headed toward. I said nothing. Withdraw your most inflammatory statements publicly. Frame them as concerns magnified by marital betrayal and incomplete information. Confirm you discovered irregularities but cannot speak to criminal intent. In return, Harbor Slate dies quietly. Elaine takes no hit. Nolan gets a tax arrangement. Rebecca becomes rogue. And you walk away with a settlement large enough to build whatever identity you think this is buying you. Whatever identity I think this is buying me. He really said that, as if freedom were still a decorative phase. I don't want your money. You will. He leaned forward. Because once the mayor starts naming names and the Phoenix family's file, your face becomes the face of all of it. Not victim, not whistleblower, survivor, wife complicity. Every panel will ask why you stayed, why you hosted, why you benefited, why you wore couture beside buildings where old people died in understaffed rooms. Cruel, accurate, weaponized because he knew shame remains the easiest tool with women even after the cage breaks. I felt the truth of the blow and let him see that I felt it. Then I answered anyway. I stayed because men like you build systems that punish early dissent and reward elegant silence. I hosted because I needed access. I benefited less than you think, and far more than I can ever be clean of. But I am here now. You are here now. And only one of us still thinks image can erase oxygen logs. His mouth hardened. Then he did something I had not expected. He softened. Or performed softness so well that for a second memory and danger blurred. Elena, he said quietly, I did love you in the only way I knew how. There is a sentence some women spend years waiting to hear, only to discover when it arrives that it carries no nourishment. It merely explains the shape of the wound. In your way? I said. Yes. And your way kills people. He looked down at the table. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Not tender. Tired. My mother will not survive prison. Then perhaps she should have considered that before monetizing the dead. His eyes flashed. She built everything. No, people like Mara built it. Nurses built it. Aides built it. Residents filled it. You and Elaine harvested it. A muscle jumped in his cheek. If she goes down, I will burn every bridge left standing. That was the true reason for the meeting. Not mercy. Warning. I stood. Then I suppose you'll have very busy days ahead. He stayed seated, but his voice followed me to the door. You think this ends with indictments? There are pension boards, unions, churches, city contracts, insurers. You are not exposing a man, Elena. You are exposing an ecosystem. Ecosystems defend themselves. I looked back once. Good, I said. Let them come into the light. Formal indictments landed 48 hours later. Gavin. Healthcare fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, bribery, falsification of records, assault enhancement attached in the civil sphere. Elaine. Conspiracy, laundering, obstruction, witness intimidation, exposure pending. Nolan. Tax fraud, transport of concealed financial records, conspiracy. Rebecca. Cooperation agreement under negotiation. 2 inspectors, 1 church mediator, 1 regional campus director, 1 state procurement aide. Then Mayor Patrick Reeve announced he would not seek re-election. Chicago turned feral for a week. Residents' families lined up at microphones. Nurses cried on camera. Board members forgot former loyalties in real time. Social media made saints and monsters out of everyone by the hour. Old photos of me at gala tables resurfaced with captions ranging from "Queen who burned him down" to "She knew." Both hurt for different reasons because both contained pieces of truth and fantasy I could not control. That week nearly broke me more than Gavin ever had. Not because of him. Because of the chorus. When strangers analyze your delay in leaving, they speak as if fear, strategy, money, access, shame, hope, conditioning, and risk arrive in separate clean boxes. They do not. They arrive braided so tightly that some days you call surviving by the wrong name just to get through dinner. The one person who saw that without requiring explanation was my father. He showed up at the safe house in a wool coat and carrying the ridiculous lemon bars he always bakes when the family is in crisis, because he believes butter remains one of God's best arguments for endurance. He sat beside me in the kitchen while Mara ran another secure upload, and Theo slept for the first time in 2 days on the sofa. "You know what I regret?" he asked. I shook my head. "That I kept congratulating you for being so composed." He looked down at his weathered hands. "I thought I was praising your strength. Maybe I was praising your camouflage." I started crying then. Not beautifully. Not in a cinematic single tear. Ugly. Exhausted crying that tastes like salt and old metal and sleep debt. He held my shoulders the way he did when I was 12 and split my chin on a bike rack. "I'm sorry," he said into my hair. For once, sorry from a man did not feel like a transaction. The case kept widening. A subpoena to an insurance captive in Vermont uncovered reserves skimming from 2 more campuses. One donor couple admitted they'd accepted discounted villas in exchange for sitting on a family advisory council that publicly praised end-of-life care quality. A former chaplain confessed he'd been paid through Elaine's foundation to steer grieving families toward peace-over process. And from Phoenix came the worst testimony, yet a respiratory therapist who said she warned Cypress Mesa leadership twice that backup systems could not support full night-wing oxygen load and was told to be solution-oriented. Solution-oriented. I still hear that sometimes in elevators. Then, because collapses are greedy, Sloane almost got herself killed. She had been under protective lodging in an extended stay suite under another name. Guarded lightly, because technically, she was a cooperating witness, not yet a formally threatened one. On a rain-heavy Tuesday evening, someone posing as room service knocked twice, and then used a MasterCard. Sloane, to her credit, did not freeze. She shoved the dresser against the door, climbed out a maintenance balcony, and fractured her wrist dropping onto an awning before building security finally intercepted the man in the hall. He carried no ID, 1 burner phone, and a printed photo of Sloane from Colcare's brand shoot. Vance called at 1:18 a.m. "This is no longer just legal pressure." "Whose man?" I asked. "We don't know yet. Could be Gavin's orbit. Could be someone else cleaning exposure." Ecosystem, I thought. In the morning, Sloane requested to speak with me again. I almost refused. Then I remembered broken wrists and printed photos. At Northwestern Memorial under guarded observation, she looked smaller than ever under white sheets. Her left arm was splinted. Hair unwashed. Face scrubbed free of the sheen she once wore like armor. She stared at the TV mounted high in the corner until I sat down. "They came because of a file I still didn't tell you about," she said. I did not bother with softness. "Then tell me now." Her eyes filled instantly with humiliation. "There's a video from 6 weeks ago. Gavin and your mother-in-law." They knew Rebecca was getting shaky after Arizona. Elaine told him if Rebecca flipped, they should let the Vegas people scare her straight. I went still. "Vegas people." Sloane nodded. He had gambling lenders on Nolan before. I didn't ask questions because I didn't want answers. But Gavin used them sometimes. For pressure. "And you have this video?" She swallowed. "Half. I copied it to a hidden cloud through a creator account because I was scared one day he'd erase me. When everything blew up, I forgot the login. Then when the guy came to my room last night, I remembered. She wrote the credentials with her good hand. Mara recovered the clip within an hour. The Vegas people turned out not to be some glamorous vice circle. Just another predatory logistics chain. Off-the-books debt collectors who also did private intimidation for men with too much money and no official appetite for public violence. In the video, Elaine's voice was unmistakable. "Rebecca is practical," she said. "Practical women spook easily. Have your Nevada friends remind her that sons in college can disappear into bad crowds." Gavin answered. "That's messy." Elaine. "Only if done by amateurs." It was not enough for a standalone conspiracy charge by itself, but coupled with the hotel attack on Sloan and the false wellness call to my parents, it built a pattern sharp enough to matter. Gavin finally got denied bail. The hearing was satisfying in the smallest, driest way possible. No shouting, no cinematic outrage. Just a federal judge reading out witness intimidation concerns, financial flight risk, concealed records, transport, attempted false mental incompetency framing, and escalating pressure on cooperating witnesses. Gavin's face stayed composed until the word remanded. Then it flickered. Just once. There it was again, the terror of being contained by witnesses. Elaine lasted 3 more days before bargaining. She requested an informal proffer through counsel, offering context on how philanthropic funds overlapped with campus operations, and implying Gavin had exaggerated her role. Translation: "Save me from prison, and I will give you enough of him to pretend motherhood was my only crime." Vance did not need my opinion. He asked for it anyway. "Take her statement," I said. "Then use it to show she knew exactly how much she was minimizing. Because here is the thing about women like Elaine. They only confess in ratios." The trial date loomed. So did civil suits. So did the kind of national attention that rearranges your nervous system. Every morning I woke somewhere between Evanston and numb. Every night I dreamed about elevator alarms, old women calling for help down empty halls, and Gavin seated at immaculate tables explaining me to rooms full of smiling strangers. In the middle of that, Theo took me to Lake Michigan in 30-degree weather and made me walk the frozen edge until my lungs hurt too much to think. "You're disappearing inside the case," he said. "There's nowhere else to be." "That's not true. It's just easier." He was right. Cases have rules. Trauma doesn't. When we got back to the duplex, Mara had news. A former facilities engineer from Cypress Mesa wants immunity consideration. Says the oxygen backup failure wasn't just neglect. She looked up from her screen. He says the compliant generator was sold off and replaced with a cheaper temporary unit after Gavin personally demanded capital savings for bond optics. Not negligence. Decision. At that point, what remained was not whether Gavin would go down. It was whether he would take Elaine and as much of the ecosystem as possible with him. He nearly didn't. 2 weeks before trial, Gavin's attorney floated a plea through Vance. Full admission on fraud, partial on obstruction, denial on direct causation in resident deaths, limited naming of bribed officials, no mother. In return, he'd save the government time, spare families' testimony, and surrender enough assets to sound remorseful. Elaine's fingerprints were all over it. Protect the dynasty's surviving myth. Isolate the son as ambitious but misled. Let the mother remain a sorrowful civic widow. I met Vance's eyes across the conference room and said, "If he doesn't name her, the chapel ledger goes public in every civil suit anyway." "It's already discoverable," Clara added. Vance nodded. "We know. But he also knew what prosecutors always know. Trials are risk. Pleas are certainty. Certainty tempts. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I feared Gavin escaping prison. He was finished. But because the shape of the ending matters. If Elaine slipped through as an old woman who made bookkeeping mistakes while grieving her husband's legacy, the machine would learn the wrong lesson again. At 2:04 a.m., my phone lit up with a secure message from an unknown federal contact code. "This is Lena Cho. We found something on the Lake Forest Drive you need to see before morning." I let her in at 3. Lena Cho had the unglamorous precision of all my favorite people in the case. No speeches, no wasted empathy. Just a tablet, a thumb drive, and the kind of face that says she trusts evidence more than breathing. She placed the tablet on the table. It was footage from inside Elaine's home office. Not live security private archive copied from the Lake Forest safe drive. Time-stamped 9 months earlier. Gavin stood by the fireplace while Elaine sat in a pale suit with one leg crossed over the other, reading from a file. "Cypress Mesa Phase 1 loss tolerance?" she asked. Gavin said, "If they fill slower than model, we compress nights and bridge with reserve float." Elaine turned a page. "And if deaths spike?" He shrugged. "High acuity residents die." Elaine's eyes stayed on the file. "Dying is normal. Clustering is not. You must control clustering." Then she looked up and added, crystal clear, "We can absorb 1 lawsuit. We cannot absorb narrative contagion." I stared at the screen. Lena said, "There's more." Second clip. Elaine signing approval on Memorial Reserve transfer routing through her foundation. Third clip. Elaine instructing Nolan to move Elena's old shell under Harbor Slate before winter, so if she ever gets righteous, we can let her wear some of the mud. Fourth clip. Elaine, after reading about one Phoenix death. If the daughter is the dramatic one, settle through prayer first. No ratios now, no ambiguities, just authorship. By 8 a.m., the plea offer changed. Elaine was in, or trial it was. She tried one last move before surrendering. She requested to see me. No cameras this time. No monitored Gavin-style persuasion. Just a courthouse consultation room through counsel, because apparently even women who classify grief believe in final performances. I went because I wanted to see what a collapsed matriarch looked like when style could no longer outrun consequence. Elaine wore cream. Of course she did. Even under indictment she looked like an expensive sermon. When the lawyer left us alone, she folded her hands and regarded me the way she had the first day Gavin brought me to Thanksgiving appraisal, sharpened to politeness. "You've been very effective," she said. "I learned from observation." A tiny smile. "Not your mother, then." "No, she loves people. That can be trained out." I almost laughed at the monstrous honesty of it. "Why did you really want to see me?" "Because I want to know whether any part of you understands what you destroyed." "Say it." She tilted her head. "Continuity." I said nothing. Institutions are never pure, Elena. Not hospitals, schools, churches, philanthropy, cities. They are managed compromises. Gavin was greedy, yes. Nolan was weak. Rebecca was frightened. But the system worked because people need somewhere to place their parents, their pensions, their hope. We provided a story large enough to hold all that. You provided a story large enough to hide theft. She accepted that with a small lift of her shoulder. And yet families moved in. Investors signed. Voters donated. Priests blessed. You think corruption survives because villains are powerful. It survives because the alternative is administratively exhausting. That sentence lodged in me like glass because it was evil and not entirely wrong. Elaine leaned forward. "Do you know what your mistake is? You think exposure purifies. It doesn't. It merely redistributes hunger." I looked at her and saw the future she expected: new investors, new boards, new smiling men selling safety with better software and cleaner fonts. She believed cycles were immortal. She believed I had won only the cosmetic round. Maybe she was right at scale. But scale was not the only place, meaning lives. "My mistake," I said, "was thinking the women in this family survived by endurance. We survived by being taught to absorb. I'm done absorbing." For the first time, something like genuine dislike broke clean across her face. "Then enjoy being the woman everyone thanks in public and blames in private," I stood. "Better than being the woman who learns to catalog the dead by manageability." She did not answer. Gavin pleaded guilty 12 days later. Elaine pleaded guilty 6 hours after him. Not out of remorse. Out of loss calculation. In open court, Gavin admitted to fraudulent transfer structures, manipulated staffing reports, bribed oversight pathways, witness intimidation efforts, and concealment of care failures. He also, under allocution pressure and plea terms, acknowledged that Elaine approved memorial reserve diversion and harbor slate positioning. He did not mention love. Good. There are rooms where that word should lose access permanently. Families watched from the gallery. So did nurses. So did reporters. So did 3 former residents in wheelchairs whose children had pushed them through rain to be there. When the judge asked whether anyone wished to speak before sentencing recommendations were set, one daughter stood. Her name was Marisol Vega. Her father had died at Brookline Terrace after a delayed response and falsified fall notation. She looked at Gavin, then Elaine, then at the court. "You made us think my dad died in a building full of care," she said. "What actually happened is he died inside your math. Nothing else said that week mattered more." Sentencing came months later. Because federal justice walks, it does not sprint. Gavin got 24 years. Elaine got 9. Nolan got 7. Rebecca got 5 with cooperation credit. Inspectors, mediators, procurement aides, and assorted orbiting cowards received their own combinations of plea mercy and public shame. Mayor Reeve avoided prison through a state bargain so ugly it made half the city sick. Vance lost friends and gained promotions. Mara launched an elder care accountability nonprofit that terrified luxury operators within 6 months. Theo went back to Denver and started calling every Sunday, which in our family is almost clingy. Felix Rowan surrendered his concierge license and opened a low-cost clinic on the west side in his mother's name. Sloan disappeared into a witness relocation arrangement in Oregon after testifying. I heard later she enrolled in a public health communications program. I did not seek confirmation. As for me, I did not become a saint, a pundit, or a face of resilience for morning television segments. I turned down all of it. The civil suit settled into a fund structure for resident families and public investors. My own divorce concluded quietly because once Gavin pleaded, there was nothing left to theatrically contest. The penthouse sold. The art sold. The river house sold. Half the board pretended they always suspected everything. The other half joined reform councils and wrote op-eds about ethics and aging. I learned how quickly disgrace can be rebranded as leadership if you hire the right consultants. 3 months after sentencing, I went alone to Cedar Hollow. The campus had new management, half new staff, brighter halls, and a lobby stripped of coal care branding. There was a memory wall near the garden with framed photographs families had chosen to leave. Wedding pictures, army portraits, a retired principal holding a pie, a woman in roller skates in 1968. Proof that each event had once been a whole life with private jokes and favorite soup and opinions about baseball. I stood there longer than I expected. A nurse in green scrubs eventually came over and asked if I wanted the chaplain. No, I said. I just wanted to look at the people. She nodded like she understood something unspoken and went back to work. Outside, winter sun hit the parking lot in flat silver bands. I sat in my car and cried again. Quietly this time. For all the versions of me that had lived inside the machine believing composure was the same thing as adulthood. Then I drove north. I rented a small place in Milwaukee first because I needed a city that was close enough to history to stay honest, but far enough from Chicago to let my nervous system unclench. For 6 months I slept badly, read case law, ignored interview requests, and learned how to cook for one without treating it like an indictment. I went back to legal work slowly, first consulting anonymously for patient rights litigation, then formally joining a firm that represented elder neglect cases and whistleblowers. The first time I signed my own brief again, under Elena Mercer, I had to set the pen down afterward because my hand was shaking, not from fear, from return. 1 year to the week after the gala, Theo called and asked what I was doing that night. Working. No, you're coming downstairs. He had flown in without telling me. Mara was with him, so were my parents. They had rented the tiny wine bar on the corner under my apartment, the one with mismatched chairs and an owner who always gave me an extra bread basket because she said I had lawyer shoulders. No cameras. No donors. No speeches. Just the people who had held the line while I crawled back into myself. Mara raised a glass. To Elena, who finally stopped hosting the wrong room. We all laughed, and it didn't hurt. Later, after my parents left and Theo had gone outside to argue lovingly with a rideshare app, Mara stayed behind to help stack dessert plates because she cannot relax without organizing something. You know what the weird part is? I said. What? I thought winning would feel louder. She wiped a table with practiced efficiency. That's because you were married to a man who confused volume with meaning. I smiled into my wine. She looked at me. You know you didn't just burn him down, right? I exposed him. No. Mara tossed the towel onto a chair. You forced a room full of people to stop calling predation leadership. That's bigger. Maybe. Or maybe what mattered was smaller. The daughter who got a real chart review. The resident who now had night staff. The nurse who wouldn't be told solution-oriented meant silent. The future wife of some future polished man who would find an article about Gavin Cole before deciding whether her unease was imagination. People love a clean revenge ending. One sentence, one reveal, one villain punished while the heroine walks away, glowing under some morally satisfying sky. Real endings are messier. You still wake at 3 a.m. sometimes. You still hear the slap in dreams. You still mistrust rooms that applaud too quickly. You still notice which men joke about crazy exes in board meetings, and which women go quiet when they do. But if you want the final payoff, here it is. What nobody tells you about taking down a man like Gavin is that prison does not end the admin. It begins the archaeology. Once the headlines moved on, the real work started. Depositions, resident transfer audits, missing medcart keys, capital expenditure maps, sealed side letters. The specific, boring paperwork through which cruelty launders itself into policy. I spent half my days with spreadsheets and half with daughters and sons who still used present tense because grief had been interrupted by fraud. One son from Kenosha brought his mother's favorite cardigan to every mediation, as if the texture might help him remember the right questions. A retired bus mechanic from Peoria cried because he'd moved his wife into Brookline Terrace after 3 tours in Iraq and kept saying, I thought I was bringing her somewhere defended. A teacher from Mesa, Arizona, had a binder with fluorescent tabs and every unanswered email she ever sent about oxygen alarms. Families do this after institutions betray them. They become accidental archivists. So did I. My firm gave me a windowed office I barely used because I preferred the war room really, just a long conference room with legal pads, pizza boxes, and enough charging cords to reanimate a small city. The first major civil settlement conference lasted 11 hours. Opposing counsel for the coal insurers arrived with custom binders and the practiced sorrow of men who bill by quarter-hour compassion. Their lead attorney, Martin Keene, opened with, No amount of money can undo tragedy. I said, then let's stop calling what happened tragedy. Tragedy is a tornado. This was a billing model. That line circulated later. People love a sharp sentence when it lands after enough blood. But the sentence only worked because I had the numbers behind it. Understaffing percentages, overtime suppression, retained reserves, death cluster memos. You cannot shame systems into accountability unless you also show them the math they hoped no one would learn to read. During those months, Gavin wrote to me 4 times from federal detention. The first letter arrived through counsel because officially every contact path had to be documented. Cream stationery. His prison number in the top right corner. Same clean penmanship he used when he wrote donor thank you notes and anniversary cards full of expensive emptiness. Elena, I know your lawyers will tell you not to read this with any softness, but I hope some part of you still remembers there was a time before all this when we were not enemies. I am not asking forgiveness. I am asking accuracy. My mother built the habits. I inherited the velocity. That is not an excuse, only a context. You always understood context better than most. If the civil team reaches out regarding Elaine's personal residence and charitable trust distributions, know that some assets there were intended for Nolan's children, not for concealment. They are innocent. I know that word means little for me now. Still, I stopped there the first time. Then I read the rest anyway, because dangerous men often hide the useful truth between 2 manipulations. The rest was exactly what you'd expect. Selective tenderness. Old private details. An anecdote about our honeymoon in Maine, as if memory could function as currency. One line about how Sloane was never important, which irritated me more than I can explain because even in collapse he needed women ranked. And then the real reason for the letter. Elaine's lake house trust and a request that I consider proportional mercy. I passed the letter to Clara and laughed. Do you know what I hate most? I asked. What? She said. That even now he thinks I'm the route to comfort. Clara tapped the page. He thinks you're the route to narrative. Comfort is secondary. We litigated the lake house. Not because I cared about extracting one more jewel from the family crown, but because 3 Phoenix families were still fighting over funeral debt, while Elaine's counsel argued she needed the property retained for health stability. The lake house sold in month 7. 2 families paid off mortgages with their shares. One endowed a respiratory scholarship in the name of a daughter who used to sit up nights checking her father's home oxygen tubing because she trusted herself more than the campus. I learned then that money can never equal repair, but it can remove one more humiliation from grief. Elaine wrote only once. Her letter came on heavy cream cardstock because of course even federal prison correspondence from Elaine Cole looked like an invitation to a donor brunch. Elena, women like us are judged not by whether we commit hardness, but by whether we commit it without style. You have spent the last year performing morality for a public that will turn on you the instant another scandal entertains them more. I, at least, never mistook crowds for conscience. You likely imagine I write to beg. I do not. I write to advise. Your new career around these families and these rights will consume you if you continue taking each case personally. Institutions outlast appetite for reform. They always do. If you wish to survive, become strategic again. Emotion is for speeches. Architecture is for power. There was more. A note about some foundation contact who might be useful if I wanted a board seat one day. Elaine had managed, from prison, to write me a recruitment memo into the very class of woman I had escaped. I did not answer, but I kept the letter, because she was right about one thing I needed to hear from the mouth I hated most. If I took every case personally, it would burn me hollow. That realization changed how I rebuilt. I stopped trying to be the injured woman who happened to know the law and became the lawyer who refused to let injury be sentimentalized. I hired a trauma-informed investigator. I pushed for data specialists on every major elder neglect case. I partnered with Mara's nonprofit and created a training series for family councils titled Honest Words, the practical version of the thing Marisol Vega had named in court. We taught people how to read staffing ratios, incident reports, reserve disclosures, and the difference between comfort measures and chemical convenience. The sessions filled every time. There is a huge market in America for glossy caregiving hope, and almost none for the unsexy mechanics of not being lied to. That gap became my obsession. The first public forum I agreed to was at a state university in Madison. The organizers wanted a survivor story. I gave them a compliance lecture with a pulse. We spoke about how luxury branding often hides labor compression. We talked about nonprofit subsidiaries, grievance funnels, and settlement language. A mother in the second row raised her hand and asked, "How do we know when being polite is making us disappear from the file?" I answered without thinking. The minute you start editing your concern to sound easier to dismiss. People wrote that down. On the drive back to Milwaukee, Mara called and said, "Congratulations, you've become the least soothing inspirational speaker in the Midwest." That sounds correct. It is correct, she said. Also, registration for the next seminar tripled. Gavin's final sentencing hearing on the death-related enhancements took place nearly 18 months after the gala because the system needed forensic linkage, not outrage. By then he looked older in a way prison magazines never capture. Not ragged. Reduced. He had lost the performance team around his face. No assistants, no ironed myth, just a tall man in issued khaki, learning how little charisma matters when every story in the room already knows you. The courtroom was fuller than the first time. More family members, more reporters, fewer society observers. Society had moved on to another implosion involving a tech founder and a missing yacht. Families remain. They do not trend. They continue. When the judge invited victim statements, Marisol spoke again, but so did others. A son from Brookline said, "You billed us for violin nights while my mother's call light went unanswered." A former aide from Cedar Hollow said, shaking but steady, "You made us choose who waited 10 more minutes." Then something happened I had not anticipated. Felix Rowan asked to speak. He stood in a dark suit that no longer fit his old life and addressed the court without notes. I treated Mr. Cole as a concierge physician. I accepted privilege in exchange for proximity and called that professionalism. My mother died in his system while I still believed I was observing from outside it. I was not outside it. None of us with credentials were. He looked directly at Gavin. "You taught people like me the most dangerous lie in healthcare, that polished environments and complicated dashboards excuse moral vacancy." The courtroom stayed very still. Felix sat. Gavin did not look at him. When the judge increased the enhancement exposure and described Colcare's model as a sustained enterprise of theft, facilitated by image management and strategic dehumanization, I felt no joy. Just finality, the good kind, dense and quiet. Afterward, in the hallway, reporters shouted for reaction. I said only, "The sentence matters less than the precedent. We are long overdue to stop treating elder neglect wrapped in luxury branding as a softer species of harm." That ran on legal blogs for weeks, which pleased me more than television ever could. The strangest aftermath came from the families I never expected to hear from. One mailed me recipes. One sent a Christmas card every year with no note, just a photo of 3 generations and a handwritten, "We're okay now." One man from Arizona delivered a box of hand-carved wooden puzzles to the office because his wife used to make them, and people who help old folks should have something that still takes patience. I kept one puzzle on my desk. It is a terrible shape, all odd joints and stubborn corners, and I love it more than any gift Gavin ever bought. About 19 months after the gala, I made the mistake of attending a private healthcare investment dinner in Chicago because our firm had been invited to discuss transparency reforms, and I believed, foolishly, that enough time had passed for me to be in a room like that without feeling my skin remember. The venue was one of those riverfront clubs upholstered in quiet money. I wore black, kept my voice level, answered policy questions, and almost convinced myself I had become immune to those old atmospheres. Then a man from a REIT in Dallas, not recognizing me at first, said over lobster spoons, "The Cole situation was unfortunate, but honestly, branding aside, some of those families were going to be impossible no matter what." I looked at him for 3 seconds. Then I said, "That sentence should follow you professionally for the next decade." The table went silent. He blinked. "I'm sorry?" "No, you're not. You're revealing the problem. There is no version of impossible family members that justifies falsified records, sedation cover-ups, or reserve theft. What you mean is some families were expensive to manipulate." The host nearly swallowed his napkin. Across from me, a hospital general counsel I respected slowly set down her fork and said, "She's right." That woman later referred 3 major cases to my team. This is how culture shifts, if it shifts at all. Not through redemption arcs. Through embarrassment finally attaching to the correct people. 2 years after sentencing, Milwaukee no longer felt like a waiting room. I bought a narrow brick house on a quiet street with enough backyard for tomatoes and 1 stubborn maple tree. I painted the study myself because after years in stage spaces, I had developed a powerful need to own ugly effort. The color looked terrible, wet, and magnificent dry. Theo said that was a metaphor, and I told him to stop narrating my life. My mother visited and cried in the kitchen because she said I moved like myself again. My father assembled bookshelves badly and called it custom carpentry. Mara stored 6 boxes of nonprofit campaign signs in my basement without asking, which is her version of intimacy. It all felt gloriously ordinary. Then one rainy Tuesday, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was the river necklace Gavin had once taken from me and put on Sloan for the gala. The diamonds were reset into a simple pendant, almost austere. No note. Just a jeweler's receipt from Oregon and 1 line typed on a plain card. Paid for by my first honest paycheck. Thought this belonged back with the woman who spotted it first. Sloan. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time looking at that card. In another version of myself, I might have thrown the necklace into Lake Michigan. In the older version, I might have hidden it in a drawer and called that moving on. Instead, I sold it through a broker 2 weeks later and used every cent to fund a respite grant at Mara's nonprofit for families caring for high-acuity elders at home while waiting for safe placements. I named the grant the First Honest Paycheck Fund and did not tell anyone why. Mara figured it out anyway and laughed until she cried. By year 3, our office had become annoyingly good at what it did. We won injunctions. We forced disclosures. We trained county ombuds. We built a quiet data coalition across 3 states that tracked recurrent operators trying to re-enter the market under cleaned-up names and sunnier brochures. Investors started asking sharper questions before funding memory care luxury conversions. Not enough. Never enough. But enough to make some future Gavin somewhere slightly less comfortable. That mattered. What surprised me more was the personal part I had assumed was dead. I fell in love again in fragments so uncinematic. I almost missed it. Not with a billionaire founder, not with a politician. Not with anyone who ever said the word legacy without irony. His name was Jonah Hale, 41, civil engineer, widower, terrible at small talk, excellent at repairing old porches, possessed of the radical skill of listening all the way to the end of a sentence. We met because he was consulting on an accessibility renovation for one of Mara's respite centers, and I kept arguing with his draft ramp angle. Romance built from ADA compliance is not glamorous, but I recommend it. For months, we were simply adjacent coffee after site visits. Shared exasperation over grant paperwork. One lunch that turned into an afternoon because neither of us noticed. Jonah never asked the lurid questions first. He knew enough about my history to know that curiosity can feel predatory when the whole country has already consumed your worst season as content. One evening, while we were painting handrails at the center, he said, "You know what I like about you?" I'm almost afraid to ask. You never confuse composure with agreement. I stood on that ladder with a paintbrush in my hand and thought, there are men who notice the right thing. I did not tell him I loved him until much later. Not because I didn't know, but because for a long time the words still felt like a hallway where I had once been cornered. When I finally said it, in my tomato garden with dirt on my wrists and rain threatening over the fence, Jonah just nodded once and said, "I know. I've been trying not to rush you into saying it. No performance, no claim, just room." Room was everything. The only time Gavin managed to reach me after sentencing was through one final newspaper interview, 4 years in. Some weekend magazine editor decided the country needed a "Where Are They Now?" retrospective on emblematic corporate scandals. They ran a prison phone interview excerpt in which Gavin, older and still infuriatingly articulate, said, "Elena was always underestimated. By me most of all." But I reject the simplistic villain narrative. Institutions fail because many people prefer comfort to scrutiny. When Mara sent me the screenshot, she added, "He's still auditioning for smartest monster in the room." I should have ignored it. Instead, I read the whole interview. He never apologized. Not really. He contextualized. He theorized. He diagnosed society. He made himself an essay instead of a man. Halfway down, though, one line snagged me. The one thing Elena understood that I didn't was timing. I thought power meant deciding when everyone else had to listen. She understood power can also mean deciding when you stop helping the lie breathe. I closed the article after that. It irritated me that after everything, Gavin still managed to say one true thing beautifully. But beauty was never the same as absolution. I know that now in my bones. On the 5th anniversary of the gala, Mara convinced me to attend the opening of a permanent family advocacy office, funded partly by the settlement structures from Coal Care and the later cases that followed. The office sat in a modest building near Milwaukee's medical district. Nothing fancy. Good parking. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly honest. Above the door hung a brushed metal sign. The Mercer Center for Family Care Transparency. I stopped on the sidewalk. "Mara," I said, horrified, "absolutely not." She beamed. "Too late. The sign's already mounted. I told you not to name anything after me. You told me not to throw galas. This is not a gala." Families came. Ombuds came. 3 nurses from Cedar Hollow's new management came. So did Marisol Vega with her little boy, who used the waiting room chairs as a racetrack and informed me solemnly that my office had bad candy but good crayons. During the short remarks, I kept it simple. This center exists because too many families are told to feel grateful before they're given enough information to be safe, I said. No one should need a law degree, a whistleblower, or a viral disaster to understand what is happening to the people they love. Applause followed, but the kind that warms rather than deafens. Afterward, an older man in a plaid jacket approached me. I recognized him a second late. Carl Jenkins, the former project manager who first handed over those construction fatality files outside my grandmother's cabin. His beard had gone almost entirely white. "I wanted to see this before I die," he said, looking around the office. "You look annoyingly alive to me," I said. He laughed. "Fair enough." He reached into his coat and gave me a small brass object, a level vial from an old construction tool, cleaned and mounted on a wooden block. "For your desk," he said, "to remember the line matters." I keep it there still. So yes, the ending was convincing. Gavin lost the empire. Elaine lost the dynasty. The machine got dragged into light hard enough that some future machines now have to work a little harder to hide their knives. Families got money, though never enough. Precedent got made. People in polished rooms became slightly less comfortable with words like ordinary outcomes and tragedy when the spreadsheets say otherwise. But the strongest payoff was not the sentence or the headlines or even the day I won that later federal case with one clean line. It was smaller. One evening, years after the gala, Jonah and I were closing up the advocacy center after a workshop for adult children navigating dementia care contracts. Everyone else had gone. The waiting room smelled like coffee and dry erase markers. Rain tapped the windows. On the wall near reception hung a framed print of a simple sentence we use in trainings now. If the language gets softer while the facts get worse, ask for the records. Jonah was stacking chairs when he looked at me and said, "You know, for someone once called an ornament, you've become a surprisingly effective structural engineer." I laughed so hard I had to sit down. And that, maybe, was the truest end. Not revenge. Not vindication. Recognition. He saw me as architecture, not decoration. Built, not arranged. Load-bearing. I did not need Gavin to hear that. I only needed it to be true. 2 years after Gavin was sentenced, I argued a case in federal court on behalf of families from a different chain, different branding, same understaffing math. Across the aisle sat a defense team from one of the sleekest firms in the Midwest. Their lead partner rose, smiled, and tried the old trick in polished language, suggesting my clients were emotionally amplifying unfortunate but statistically ordinary outcomes. Statistically ordinary outcomes. I stood up before the judge, straightened my jacket, and said, "Your Honor, the defense is attempting to rename preventable harm as inevitability because inevitability is cheaper." Silence fell. The kind I know now. The useful kind. The judge ordered document production expanded by the end of day. Afterward, in the courthouse corridor, one of my clients, a school librarian whose mother had died after medication delays, caught my hand and whispered, "Thank you for making them use honest words." That was it. No chandeliers, no cameras, no dramatic music. Just truth landing clean in a hallway that smelled like old paper and coffee. When I walked outside, the wind off the river was cold enough to sting. I stood there for a moment with my briefcase in one hand and my own name intact inside my chest. Gavin once told 200 people I was an ornament. He was wrong. I was the blade hidden in the arrangement, and when he finally grabbed for me in public, he cut his whole empire open. If you've ever had to stay quiet long enough to gather proof, or smile in a room that would not protect you, tell me where you're watching from and follow. Because some stories don't end when the monster falls. They end when the people who survived him finally learn how to speak without asking permission first.